The year is 1977. Moscow. Rain drummed on the windows in small drops, turning the evening city into a shapeless blur. Dmitry Sokolov, a junior KGB analyst, sat in a dimly lit room, staring at the screen of an old computer. A strange code was flickering on the monitor, which he had been trying to decipher for several hours. The code wouldn't budge. The algorithm embedded in the message was strange. None of the usual encryption methods were suitable. The numbers formed patterns that seemed almost organic, as if someone were writing not with a machine, but with a living being. Dmitry automatically rubbed his eyes and looked around. His colleagues had already left, and his office was empty. Just him, the lamp, and a strange message. "It's not ours," he muttered, feeling a lump rise in his throat. Suddenly, the door creaked behind him. He turned around and saw Colonel Gromov, his superior. The man looked at him coldly, like a predator at its prey. "Are you done?" The colonel's voice sounded like a hammer blow. "Not yet, Comrade Colonel. The algorithm. It's weird. It doesn't look like our or American codes." Gromov came closer, his boots creaking loudly on the floor. "Tomorrow morning, you will transfer all the materials to Section 12. That's their business. And forget you saw it." Dmitry regretted the question as soon as the words left his lips. Gromov looked at him for a long time, as if assessing whether it was worth killing him right now. "You don't need to know that. Do what you're told." The colonel left, and Dmitry remained sitting in silence, feeling his back covered with sweat. That evening, he decided to take a chance. He quickly made a copy of the data on a personal floppy disk and put it in his pocket. Something about the code bothered him. It wasn't curiosity, but a feeling that he had touched something dangerous but incredibly important. The next day, he met with Igor Chernov, his friend and cryptographer. Igor lived in a tiny apartment on the outskirts. It looked more like a laboratory than a dwelling. Everywhere there were books, sheets of formulas and homemade devices. "Are you serious? Did you steal classified data?" Igor looked at Dmitry as if he had lost his mind. "I didn't steal it, I just saved a copy. Take a look for yourself. It's not a cipher, it's something else." Igor inserted the floppy disk into the computer. Symbols flashed across the screen. "That's..." He frowned. "These are the coordinates." "Coordinates of what?" Igor shook his head. "I do not know. But here." He pointed to a part of the code. "It's not just a text, it's like a signal." "A signal?" Dmitry felt a chill run through his body. "Yes. Like a radio broadcast, but the transmission is from somewhere outside." Igor said this in a voice that made the room really cold. At that moment, there was a sharp knock on the door. "Open up." "The KGB." Igor and Dmitry froze. "Damn," Igor whispered. The door flew open with a bang. Two men in black coats burst into the room. One of them immediately went to the computer. "This data has been confiscated." His voice was as cold as his eyes. "You have no right," Igor began, but the second agent hit him on the back of the head with the butt of his rifle. Dmitry wanted to rush to help, but he felt strong hands clutching his shoulders. "You're coming with us too." They handcuffed him and led him to a car. Everything was so fast and silent that the neighbors didn't even open the door. He was taken to a building with no signage. There was a long corridor with gray walls, lit by dim lamps. Dmitry was led into a room with a metal table and a chair. "Sit down," one of the agents said and went out, leaving him alone. A few minutes later, a man in a gray suit entered. He looked completely ordinary, but there was something dead and inhuman in his eyes. "Sokolov," he began calmly, "do you know what you did?" Dmitry was silent. "You're facing something you shouldn't have seen. We'll give you a chance. You'll forget about it. You won't ask any questions. You will live your normal life." "And Chernov?" Dmitry felt his voice tremble. The man smiled, but it had nothing to do with warmth. "He's gone." Dmitry felt his heart skip a beat. "Do you understand me?" He couldn't answer. "My whole body was shaking." The man slowly stood up. "Think about it, you have a choice. But only one." After that, he was knocked out again. When he woke up, he was at home. "My head was pounding, and my ears were ringing. There was a note on the table. Don't go where you're not asked, or you'll disappear like your friend." Dmitry sat in absolute silence, feeling fear constrict his body. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought flashed. It's too late to stop. Dmitry spent the night without sleep. The note on the table seemed to stick into his mind, reminding him of what had happened. Igor is dead. He had no proof left, And most importantly, he had no idea what exactly he had managed to decipher. But one thing was clear. He had accidentally crossed the line, beyond which something much more than the intrigues of the KGB begins. In the morning, he decided to return to the office earlier than usual, hoping to find at least something in his notes or on the server. When he came out of the entrance, the fog hung in the air like a thick blanket. The city seemed dead. When Dmitry crossed the courtyard, he felt the gaze. Someone was watching him. He turned around, but the street was empty. Nevertheless, the feeling of anxiety did not let go, as if he was surrounded by invisible eyes. After entering the building, he went up to his office. The corridors were empty, as usual at this time. On the spot, he quickly turned on the computer and opened the folder where he had been working on the cipher the previous evening. The files are gone. Every last byte has been erased. Dmitry frowned. It couldn't be a coincidence. He reviewed everything, but to no avail. There was only one option left, the floppy disk he had hidden. The floppy disk was at home, hidden under the floorboard. Dmitry decided that he would pick her up in the evening, but an inner voice persistently whispered that he could not wait. He left the office, looking down at his feet, trying not to arouse suspicion. But as he passed Colonel Gromov's room, he heard something strange. "They're warning us that this is our mistake." Gromov's voice sounded muffled but tense. "We can't let anyone else find out." Dmitry stopped. There was a conversation going on outside the door. The second voice was less clear, it seemed to be shaking like an old radio wave. "The system is unstable. If you don't clean it up, the consequences will be irreversible." Dmitry held his breath. Those sounds? It was a voice, but it wasn't human. "That's not your concern. I will order the destruction of those who know too much," Gromov replied. Dmitry understood. It was about him. He left the building, trying not to run. The passers-by seemed like ordinary people, but now he didn't trust anyone. When he got home, he immediately took out a floppy disk. But before inserting it into the computer, he closed the windows, locked the doors, and even closed the blackout curtains. The fear became obsessive, like an itch. When the floppy disk was loaded, the code reappeared on the screen. Dmitry tried to decipher it again. Some of the data was recovered. These were the same coordinates, but now an inscription has been added to them. "Surveillance is activated, waiting for the end of the cycle." Strange symbols flashed below. They seemed meaningless at first, but the longer he looked, the more they looked like drawings. The patterns formed into a symmetrical shape, as if it were natural, but completely alien. A knock on the door made him jump up. "Who's there?" The voice trembled. There was no response. Dmitry cautiously approached and peered through the peephole. No one. When he returned to the table, the screen was flickering. The patterns on it have changed. They looked like a face now. It was inhuman, but it seemed to be staring at him intently. "Dmitry Sokolov." The voice came out of the computer speakers. It was deep, synthetic, but somehow sinister. Dmitry froze. "Who's that?" "You've crossed the line. We're watching. If you continue, you will die." The screen went blank and then turned back on. "The code is gone." There was only one word in its place. "Choice." Dmitry sat in silence, unable to move. The knock on the door was repeated, much louder now. "Open up, Sokolov." The voice belonged to Gromov. He understood. This is the end. Or maybe the beginning. Dmitry grabbed the floppy disk and jumped to the window. The fifth floor wasn't the best place to escape, but there was no choice. He grabbed the drain pipe and started to descend. At that moment, the door to his apartment opened. "He couldn't leave," Gromov said, going inside. "Take him alive." Dmitry jumped, landed on a pile of garbage and ran into the darkness. Shots rang out behind him, bullets whizzed overhead, but he didn't stop. His heart was pounding, his legs were carrying him further and further, and only one thing was beating inside. He needed to survive. We need to understand what kind of observation it is. And what they want. Dmitry walked through the narrow, rain-soaked streets. His clothes were soaked through, and his shoes were slipping on the sidewalk. My head was in chaos. He heard the whistle of bullets, saw the distorted faces of KGB agents, but now, in relative safety, it seemed to him that it was a nightmare. He stopped at an empty phone booth. The coin in his pocket seemed like a salvation. Inserting it into the phone, Dmitry dialed the number of the only person who could help him. "Hello?" The woman's voice sounded muffled. "Ekaterina, it's me, Dmitry Sokolov. We need to meet. It's urgent." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Are you crazy? I don't talk to runaways. Please. It's a matter of life and death." Not just mine. It took a few seconds before she answered, okay. Come to Chistya Prudy. In an hour. She hung up the phone. Dmitry lowered his head. Now he knew that at least he had a purpose. Dmitry arrived at Chistya Prudy. Moscow was deserted at night, with only a few streetlights casting a dim light on the wet pavement. Ekaterina was waiting for him on a bench by the pond. She was wearing a long coat with boots peeking out from under it. Her face seemed pale, and her eyes were constantly darting from side to side. What have you done? What is it? She asked as soon as Dmitry sat down next to her. I found the code. It leads to something that shouldn't exist. You have to help me. Ekaterina grimaced. Do you have any idea that I'm being watched too? I've already been called to Section 12. Do you know what they were asking? About what I know about you. Dmitry shuddered. Then you understand that I can't just disappear. I need to get to the end. She was silent for a long time, and then said softly, have you heard about Object 17-2? No. It's a place where data like your ciphers is stored. If you want to understand what you're up against, you need to get there. Dmitry froze. How? Ekaterina sighed, taking a small key out of her pocket. This is the key to one of the terminals. I was working on a communication project. Everything you need is there. But this place is not guarded by people. What do you mean? What is it? He asked, feeling an icy wave of fear wash over him again. Catherine just shook her head. You'll find out for yourself. She stood up, but Dmitry grabbed her arm. And you? If I keep helping you, I'll get killed. It's the last thing I can do for you. She broke free and quickly left, disappearing into the darkness. Dmitry was left alone. Facility 17-2 was located on the outskirts of the city, hidden under the guise of an abandoned factory. Dmitry sneaked into the building late at night. High walls surrounded the area, and guards roamed inside. But what bothered him the most was the strange movement in the dark. He hid behind a metal container, looking at the courtyard. A guard passing by suddenly stopped. His body jerked as if he had been electrocuted. Then he turned around, and Dmitry saw his face. It wasn't a human face. His eyes glowed with a dull green light, and his skin resembled smooth metal. The guard jerked his head up, as if he had caught something, and slowly turned in Dmitry's direction. Dmitry barely managed to hide. He held his breath until the footsteps faded away. Before continuing, he felt the key left by Ekaterina in his pocket. It was his only hope. It rained inside the building. Pipes hung from the ceiling, and the walls were covered in rust. But the cold coming from there was unnatural. Dmitry felt like something was watching him from dark corners. He reached the terminal. The key fit perfectly. The screen lit up, and the code appeared in front of him again. This time, the text was completely deciphered. The cycle is completed. The evacuation will begin in 24 hours. Dmitry froze, trying to make sense of the message. But while he was trying to analyze, the sound of footsteps came from the depths of the corridor. Heavy, uneven. He looked back and saw a figure. She was only half human. The upper part of his body was covered with metal plates, wires were sticking out of his head, and glowing eyes were looking directly at him. Go away. The creature hissed in a mechanical voice. Or, you'll become part of the contract. Dmitry realized that he had only one chance. He snatched the disc from the terminal and rushed to the exit. The creature moved after him. His footsteps echoed down the hallway. Dmitry ran, feeling fear squeeze his chest. When he ran outside, the night air hit him in the face. But there was already a hoarse metallic growl behind him. The creature was chasing him, and now the only way out was an old underground tunnel leading to the river. Dmitry disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, hoping that he would be able to survive the night. The tunnel was cold and wet. The walls, covered in slime, reflected the faint reflections of light coming from Dmitry's pocket flashlight. His breathing was fast, and his heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was about to jump out of his chest. Footsteps could be heard somewhere behind. The creature, half human, half machine, was not far behind. Dmitry froze, listening. The footsteps stopped. There was an oppressive silence, broken only by the sound of dripping water. He tried to catch his breath and moved on, but every step he took echoed loudly, as if he were shouting to the whole tunnel, I'm here. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and its light began to fade. Dmitry hit him with his palm, but it didn't help. The darkness closed around him, and at that moment, a strange metallic screech came from the depths of the tunnel, as if someone was dragging a long iron rod along the wall. You're not leaving. The creature's voice boomed. It wasn't loud, but its cold, detached sound made Dmitry shudder. He pressed himself against the wall and took a few steps back, barely suppressing a scream. A dark figure appeared in the distance. Her glowing green eyes flashed like beacons. Dmitry realized that he had nowhere else to run. "What do you want?" he shouted into the darkness. The creature stopped. His voice was softer, but no less sinister. "You're a witness. You shouldn't have seen it. But now you will become a part of us." At that moment, Dmitry saw that sharp, sparkling blades were protruding from the creature's shoulders. It took a step forward, and a loud metallic clang sounded from its feet. Without hesitation, Dmitry threw a flashlight into the creature's eyes and ran away. His feet slipped on the wet floor, his hands clutched the walls convulsively. He saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. There must be a way out, he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. The pursuer's footsteps quickened. The sound of blades scratching the walls was getting closer. Dmitry felt that he would not make it. But suddenly his fingers found something metallic, an old door. He tried the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. The creature was already nearby, its breathing a mixture of sounds, as if the engine was revving up. Dmitry slammed his shoulder into the door at the last moment, and it opened with a bang. He stumbled into another tunnel, slamming the door behind him. There was a crash behind them. The creature lunged at the door, but it held. Dmitry pulled away from her, trying to catch his breath. The new tunnel looked like a technical corridor. Pipes ran along the walls, from which steam hissed. Dmitry walked forward, clutching the disc he had managed to pull out of the terminal. He didn't know where he was going, but he felt he couldn't stop. A few minutes later, he came out into a huge room. It was a bunker. Its walls were covered with screens and complex control panels. In the center was a large glass tank filled with a cloudy liquid. Dmitry came closer. He saw something through the liquid. Creature. It looked like a human, but its arms and legs ended in metal claws, and instead of eyes there were empty hollows. There were hundreds of wires running to his body that connected him to the control panels. A message flashed on the screen in front of the tank. Experiment 17-2, status, active. The cycle is completed in 20 hours. Dmitry was trying to comprehend what he was seeing when a voice rang out behind him. "You shouldn't have come here." He turned around and saw a man in a gray suit, the one who interrogated him earlier. "Is that all of you?" Dmitry pointed at the tank in horror. "Are you making people into this?" The man didn't blink. "This is the price of progress. They gave us technology, and we gave them access to our bodies." "It's a monster," Dmitry shouted. "No, it's the future," the man replied calmly. "You can be a part of it." From around the corners of the room appeared several more of the same creatures as the one that pursued Dmitry. They were moving slowly but inexorably. Dmitry stepped back, looking around for a way out. His gaze fell on the control panel. There was a lever with an inscription, "Emergency destruction of the facility." The man noticed where Dmitry was looking and took a step forward. "Don't do anything stupid. If you destroy it, they will come back. And they'll take them all." Dmitry wasn't listening anymore. He rushed to the panel, grabbed the lever and pulled it down. The tank cracked, and the liquid inside began to boil. The creature inside convulsed, and loud sirens rang out all over the room. "You signed the death warrant for the whole country," the man shouted. Dmitry ran to the exit without looking back. The explosion that came from behind illuminated the tunnel with a bright light. The ground shook, and the walls began to crumble. He ran out of the bunker into the night air and fell to the ground, trying to catch his breath. Behind him, the old factory was already collapsing, consumed by fire and smoke. But now he knew that this was only the first step. Their contract is not finished yet. The night turned into utter chaos. The bunker, engulfed in flames, looked like a hellfire tearing into the sky. Dmitry lay on the ground, breathing heavily, feeling the ground tremble under his body. The sounds of explosions drowned out everything. It seemed to him that something no less terrible than that reservoir was about to burst inside him. But there was no escape. He struggled to his feet and took a few steps away from the burning building. My legs were weak, but my mind, still half clouded with fear, forced me to move. Every step echoed in my head. What have I done? When he was far enough away, something moved in the sky. At first they were shadows, thin as smoke, but then they became denser. The sky above the bunker sparkled with a strange light. They've come, he thought. A structure began to emerge from the clouds. It was unlike any other object known to man. A huge, shapeless, pulsating light spread across the sky, as if the air itself was becoming a part of it. Dmitry could feel the light pressing down on him, as if taking away his ability to breathe. And then there was a sound. A hum that could not be compared to anything. It was not audible in the usual sense, But Dmitry felt every note of it with his skin, bones, and nerves. He didn't know how long he had been standing under this pressure, but when he woke up, he was in the car. In the back seat. Ekaterina was driving. Her face was grim, her gaze constantly darting between the road and the rear-view mirror. "Are you awake?" "What is it?" she asked without turning around. "How did you find me?" Dmitry tried to sit up, but his body resisted. "Your chaos couldn't be overlooked." The explosion caught their attention. Catherine frowned. "Is that what you wanted?" Dmitry lowered his head. "I've seen what they've done to people. This is not a collaboration. It's a massacre. And now they've come for what you destroyed. And if we don't stop them, they won't leave until they get what they want." "What is it?" Dmitry struggled to focus. Catherine sighed. "Us." These words sounded like a sentence. The car was speeding along a broken road. "Ekaterina told me." The aliens signed an agreement with the USSR decades ago, promising technologies that would give the country an advantage over its enemies. But the price was monstrous. People have become a resource, a source of material for experiments. "Why do you think they took us? Why did they leave other countries?" Ekaterina shot Dmitry a hard look. "Because we agreed. We thought we could control them. But they couldn't?" "Of course. They used us." Dmitry ran a hand over his face, trying to make sense of her words. "How to stop it?" Catherine hesitated for a moment. "They have a central hub. An artifact that connects them to our world. They use it for navigation and control. It is located in the Carpathian Mountains, in one of the bunkers built back in Stalin's time." "And you know how to get there?" "Yes. But we'll have to hurry. After what you've done, they've probably stepped up their defenses." The trip to the Carpathians took a day. Dmitry hardly remembered how they got there. Every minute seemed like an eternity. At times, a strange light flashed in the sky, causing them to freeze and turn off their headlights. Dmitry felt as if these lights were penetrating inside him, as if they were looking for him. When they reached the entrance to the bunker, Ekaterina stopped the car and opened the trunk. Inside were weapons and equipment, obviously stolen from the arsenals of the KGB. "We're going to need this." They went inside. The bunker turned out to be huge. Its corridors went deep into the rock, every step echoed with a hollow echo. There were wires on the walls that sparkled with blue light, like blood flowing through the veins of a living being. In the center of the bunker was a room filled with panels and a screen. But the main thing was that there was a structure on the pedestal that could not be described in words. She glowed with a soft, sinister light, as if she were part of another world. "It's an artifact," Ekaterina whispered. "If we destroy it, they will lose contact with us." "How?" "With this." She took a timer charge out of her bag. But at that moment, something rustled in the hallway. Dmitry turned around and saw the figures. They were moving slowly but inexorably. Their eyes were glowing, and their bodies were half made of metal. "They're here," he whispered. "Stall for time, I'll set the charge." Dmitry grabbed the machine gun and took a step forward. He had to distract the artifact's guards so that Ekaterina could finish her job. Dmitry pressed himself against the wall, clutching a machine gun in his hands. The tunnel leading to the heart of the bunker was filled with the sounds of footsteps and metallic clanging. The feeling that he was being hunted not by people, but by machines, only increased his fear. The figures moved like something predatory, but carefully calm, as if they knew for sure that sooner or later he would be in their hands. He took a deep breath, concentrating. "Hey! Stop it!" he shouted, abruptly jumping out from behind cover and opening fire. The bullets hit the metal bodies of the creatures, causing a shower of sparks. One of them staggered, but then took a step forward. Dmitry realized that they could not be stopped by conventional weapons. "Come on, you bastards!" "Stop it!" he shouted, retreating further into the corridor. His shout attracted the attention of all the creatures, and they rushed after him, leaving the central hall. Dmitry felt his legs give out from exhaustion, but he kept running, shooting at random to keep them at bay. At that moment, he heard Ekaterina's voice through a portable radio station. "The charge is almost ready. Hold them off for another minute." Minute. It could have been forever. The green glowing creatures were rapidly closing the distance. One of them suddenly jumped, hitting the wall next to Dmitry. He fell, hitting the metal floor, but managed to roll to the side before he was pierced by a glittering blade. The machine was too far away. Dmitry groped for a grenade in his belt, pulled the pin and threw it towards the pursuers. The explosion was deafening, collapsing part of the ceiling. Dmitry got up, staggered, and rushed back to the central hall. When he reached it, Ekaterina was already standing in front of the artifact, setting up the timer. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "Just a little more," she whispered, without taking her eyes off the panel. "They're coming," Dmitry shouted. "Everything is ready." Ekaterina turned to him and glanced at the timer. "We have 2 minutes to get out." But at that moment, a figure appeared behind her. One of the creatures, larger than the others, moved faster and managed to break through the explosion. His hand turned into a long, shining blade. "Catherine!" Dmitry shouted, rushing to her. She turned around too late. The blade pierced her side. Ekaterina screamed. Blood flowed across the floor, and the creature froze, as if admiring the result. Dmitry grabbed the nearest pipe and stabbed its sharp end into the glowing eyes of the creature. It let out a mechanical growl, retreated, but did not fall. Ekaterina, barely able to stay on her feet, pointed at Dmitry. "Go away." Explosion? Her voice was weak, barely audible. "I won't leave you," he shouted, grabbing her by the shoulders. But she shook her head. "Go away. Save it. For all of us." Tears filled Dmitry's eyes, but he knew he didn't have time to argue. He got up and rushed to the exit, taking one last look at Catherine. The creature approached her again, but she gritted her teeth and reached for the nearest lever on the control panel. There was desperation mixed with determination in her eyes. Dmitry raced through the corridors, tripping over wires and debris. The timer was a ticking echo in his head. When he ran outside, the air was cold and the sky was glowing, as if a storm was about to break. He fell to the ground, turning towards the bunker. And then an explosion broke the silence. The ground shook, and light burst out, illuminating everything around. The bunker collapsed, turning into flaming rubble. A crack appeared in the sky. It looked like a giant rift, from which green and blue rays of light were shooting out. A huge object hovering above the ground began to lose its shape, as if dissolving into thin air. Dmitry looked at this sight, realizing that the artifact was destroyed, the connection was severed. The aliens were losing control. A few hours later, Dmitry was walking along a deserted road. His clothes were soaked in blood, dirt, and sweat. The sun was rising on the horizon. He was thinking about Catherine. Her sacrifice saved millions. But there was no sense of victory inside him. His legs couldn't hold him anymore, and he fell to the side of the road. The last thing he saw were streaks of light in the sky. They disappeared, disappearing with the darkness of the night. The USSR was saved. But Dmitry knew that the threat had not disappeared forever. She was just waiting for the next chance.